Well, hello and welcome to another DevNation. I'm so super happy to have all you guys today. We're going to have a lot of fun talking to you about Lambda and Quarkus and serverless technology and how Gunnar built a cool blog with this technology. So you're going to actually hear a lot of really crazy things because I want you guys to be thinking about how you would build an application with Amazon Lambda with a serverless architecture and how you might do that with Quarkus as a technology. We're going to have a large crowd today, I believe, as we get going here. Feel free to throw your questions into the chat. I'll be monitoring them. I see Sebi has showed up in the chat there. James Dade has showed up in the chat also. And James, I am enjoying that snacks. And the reason I still have some of it left is because I'm the only one eating it. And my wife tells me I can't eat it all that fast. I got to, spread it out over time. But that's really the logic behind it. Okay, so we're going to have a lot of fun for the next 30 minutes or so. Feel free to throw your questions into the chat at any given moment. I'll be pasting into the chat the slides that you'll see Gunnar going through, and also his Twitter handle, so you can follow him on Twitter. But at this point, let's turn over to Gunnar.
All right, Burr, thank you so much for having me again. I've been here a few times before, so I'm always excited to be here, so that's really cool. And this time is a bit special because usually I talk about the stuff I'm working on in my role as an engineer at Red Hat, right? Whereas today I'm going to talk about something which uses some of our projects and Quarkus in particular, but really it's about a side effort I did, something for my own personal blog. And well, in particular, I will talk about how I built a search feature for that blog. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And let me share my slides with you. Hitting the share button. And I want to share, of course. I'm in trouble to share my stuff. 1 second.
Gotta find the share button.
Yeah, so that doesn't work. Google Chrome. All right, so do you see my slides there?
We do.
All right, cool. Excellent. So let's get started. And well, to give some background, so at the beginning of the year, I created a new blog for myself. And well, I wanted to have a property where I could write about some stuff, right? And this is a static website. So, that's what people typically do these days if they can get away with it. So it's using the Hugo static site generator, so that's all pre-generated HTML, and then that's published via GitHub pages. And at some point I thought, hey, I would like to have a search functionality for this, so people can come to my site and search for the blog posts they're most interested in. And that's what I'm going to talk about. This text input field, well, and of course everything which is behind it, right? So that's going to be the topic of this talk. All right, and just to give you some structure of the talk, so I will briefly talk about why I chose a serverless solution, why I think that's a good match for this particular problem. I will introduce you to the architecture, if you will, of this implementation. I will touch on a few ways how you can build Lambda-based application using Quarkus, so there's different ways. And well, I will show it a bit in action. I will also talk about some learnings I did along the way. And as Burr was mentioning, if you got any questions during the session, definitely feel free to put them into the chat and we can talk about them. And just to get everybody onto the same page, I thought let's start with a definition in an academic way. What are we talking about when we refer to serverless? You can read this very nice definition by the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. But really, in a nutshell, to me, it's a notion of computing where you don't have to think about provisioning and operating and running server infrastructure. This is taken care of for you by some sort of platform. And then you really focus on deploying and, well, developing and deploying your functional code. You push it there, and then that's very important. This is scaled and also built on a per-use basis. So if nobody is using your stuff, you don't pay anything. If tons of people use the stuff, you will pay more money, I would say. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm interested in this, because, well, I don't expect huge traffic for that. So I hope I will get away with a very low bill on that, as we will see in a bit. So that's serverless. And now the question is, why did I choose a serverless implementation for this? And there's a few reasons. And you shouldn't be fooled. You shouldn't think serverless is the panacea for all sorts of problems. But in my case, I thought it's a good fit. And, well, mostly I saw 3 reasons there. And the first one was, well, it gives me a smaller attack surface. So this means, well, if I were to, let's take a step back. I need to have some sort of application service infrastructure there, right? So I cannot solely implement this in my static site because, well, if I have just a static HTML page, I need to have something where I actually can run this. And I could do this in JavaScript on the client, but I didn't feel like doing this because it would mean I would have to, implement a search using JavaScript, and that's not a good way to do it. So I need to have something on the server. So serverless. Now, the question is, well, if I were to run this like a traditional application and I were to deploy a VM, I don't know, an EC2 or DigitalOcean, if I want to go a bit cheaper or something like that, well, I would have to manage that thing, right? I need to install the latest updates, patches and everything. And really, I feel like I don't want to do this. I just would like to have the search feature for my blog, and I don't want to care about all the infrastructure behind it, keeping this safe and up to date and everything. So that's the one reason I don't have to do this with serverless. I just focus on my application and I can deploy it there. So that's a huge advantage for me. It takes a lot of pain and some, possible work away from me. So that's the one reason. The next one is, well, in my case, I definitely think there will be a lower cost. As I mentioned, this is built per usage. And to be honest, well, I don't expect like hundreds of thousands of users on my blog every day, right? So let's say if I were to get 10K search requests per month, that would be huge, and it would cost me 4 cents, so essentially nothing. So that's why I say, okay, in my case, this is really a good thing, and it's very cost attractive. Now, if you were to have a workload which has a high constant usage, you would go probably for serverless. You would, if it's predictable and pretty stable, you would look into something else. But for my case, I would say the low cost is an interesting factor. And lastly, to be honest, it was a learning opportunity for me, right? So I had heard about all the things like AWS Lambda, the API gateway. I mean, I knew a bit about Quarkus, of course, but then all those things and how to do this with serverless. So I was curious, how could I build this kind of functionality and see how it goes. So this learning aspect is also was an important matter for me. And by the way, I'm just going a bit back. So you can run it if you go to this blog, morling.dev. That's my website. You can try it out right now. That's you can take a look as we speak. All right. So let's talk about the solution overview. So how does it look in general? And as I mentioned, this is deployed to GitHub Pages, so this is where all the static content is coming from. And again, this helps with security. I don't need to manage Apache or anything or any kind of other web server. This is all taken care of. I just put my static pages there. But now, if I have the search request, I need to have this kind of runtime environment. And this is where the Lambda infrastructure comes into play. So that's AWS serverless runtime environment. And this is where my application is running. And as we will see, it's built using GraalVM, Quarkus, and Apache Lucene. And I will talk a bit about all those pieces and why I'm using them. The important piece here is the Lambda part. That's the core functionality of it. And now in order to access this thing from the web, there's what's called the API gateway that sits in front of it. And it takes care of the incoming HTTP requests, map it to function calls on this Lambda, and convert back the result and return it to the caller. And actually, if you go to my website, maybe some of you are trying it right now, this would be like a cross-origin request in terms of HTTP from my website, which is deployed on my domain, or which is accessible via my domain, to this API gateway, essentially. So that's the overall architecture. Now, let's talk a bit about how this is implemented. And in particular, I'm using Java, and whenever I tell people, hey, I'm using Java to implement something serverless, they are quite skeptical. And hey, is this fast enough to start up and so on? So we will talk about those things. First of all, the question, of course, is how do I get the information from my blog, the actual contents, into this search index? So I'm using Apache Lucene, which is, I would say, the de facto search library in the Java ecosystem. So this has been around for many years. It's very robust, very mature, very stable, super popular, and it comes with all those features you need for a search, right? Like result highlighting, fuzzy search, all kinds of combinators, different language support, so you can do stemming and all those kind of things. So Apache Lucene is a rock solid basis. So that's what I'm using there. And of course, you need to get the data into the search index, so Lucene can query on it. And in my case, I do this in a special way. I do this at build time. So my search service, it doesn't have any endpoint where I would, send the data via HTTP for being indexed. Instead, I do this at build time. So what I can get from my web blog, which is based on Hugo, it can give me a JSON structure, which you kind of see here on the right side, which has in JSON essentially all the contents, like the summary, title, tags, and so on. And whenever I republish my blog, I also rebuild the search application, and I put this search index right into this deployable. And I can do this because, well, I don't publish something new on my blog like every day, right? So I do it maybe once per month or something like that. So in that case, this is definitely viable to, bake the image into this deployable. And the advantage of this is then becoming immutable infrastructure, right? And that's again great in terms of security. I don't need to think about having an endpoint. I need to authenticate and so on. Really, my image is like fully self-contained. It's it's unmodifiable. It's just a nice thing. And also, if you think about it, now that as that is stateless, I could think about deploying this in different regions. So let's say my blog becomes super popular around the world, and people from South America, maybe they feel like the latency, and this is deployed in the AWS region in Europe. So maybe they feel like the latency becomes too large because they need to go from South America to Frankfurt, where this is running right now. Well, I could deploy it another time in AWS somewhere in South America, and people would have a shorter local latency, right? And this is becoming quite easy because this is immutable. So I'm pretty happy with that approach. So that's how things work on a larger level, I would say. Now let's talk a little bit about how to build a serverless application with Quarkus. And interestingly, there's different ways for doing that. And I'm going to talk just briefly about essentially 3 ways for doing it. And the first way you might be familiar with if you ever have built something for Lambda using Java before. So there's this request handler interface, which comes from the Lambda SDK, and well, you can implement that, and Quarkus allows you to use this on the JVM, but also as a native binary via GraalVM. So you definitely can do that, but well, obviously, it gives you some sort of tie-in into the Lambda infrastructure, right, or the Lambda ecosystem, because this is from the AWS SDK. So now, if I wanted to move this implementation over, I don't know, to GCP or Azure or whatever, I would have a problem because I would be bound to this particular interface. So maybe not something I would like to do, but I have this option. The next one is Funky. And Funky, that's a very cool, interesting project from the Quarkus umbrella. And essentially, it's a unified and I would say rather easy to use function as a service API. And I think the code is quite self-evident here. So really what you do is you define some sort of CDI bean. Everything in Quarkus is CDI based in application scope CDI bean. You can do dependency injection to get dependencies like this greeting service here. And then you have like one method which is annotated with it at func annotation. And this is the implementation of your Lambda. And what then Funky will do is it will essentially just map the incoming request to this parameter object, and it will map this object which we return to the caller. And now this is, an interesting model because it abstracts from the provider specifics, right? So there's different bindings, let's call it, of that for Lambda, for GCP Cloud Functions, for Knative, for Azure Functions. So really, I'm very portable if I'm using that. And also, they have an HTTP binding. So essentially, if I have a GET request or a POST request, I can map this to this function implementation. And just to give an example here, so if I were to do this curl call, well, obviously not on localhost if it were running on Lambda, but if I were using this invocation, the query parameters, they would be mapped to the properties of this friend object of this greet function. And that's, I would say, pretty straightforward. It doesn't get much easier, right? But then also that's its limitation, I would say, right? So really this is meant to be a very easy to use function, portable function implementation. This means you cannot do some things you might do with a full-blown HTTP frameworks. Let's say content negotiation, cache control, or things like, where you add URLs to different resources in a response. You cannot really do this because here you think in terms of very basic function implementation. And this is why there's a third way for implementing serverless apps with Quarkus. And this is, it allows you to do this implementation using your familiar web stack, like Vertex Web or Servlet or REST-easy. And that's actually what I settled for. So I'm using REST-easy and JAX-RS, as we see here. And if you ever have seen JAX-RS, or let's say Vertex Web, and you have used it, then you know how to implement a Lambda function on AWS Lambda, because Quarkus makes this, usable on Lambda, and it takes care of mapping everything from the Lambda environment towards this endpoint. So that's what I'm doing. I'm using the JAX-RS annotations and everything in my search implementation. And now the nice thing is I could run this as a Lambda, but then I also could run this as a traditional application running somewhere else if I were to, if I wanted to do this, right? Like as a regular container image, let's say.
Well, is that portable to Knative as well as Lambda? Is that what you mean?
Absolutely right. Okay. So you could, and actually I will show it later on. You can build a regular container image from that, which means you can deploy it to Knative if that's your thing, and I really like it, of course. So you could do that, and it's a matter of configuration, actually. For me, it's a matter of selecting a build profile in my Maven pod, so it's really easy.
Okay.
So just to wrap up on those three options, so I would guess I would use the request handler stuff. Maybe if I were to use, to port existing code over. So maybe I have already existing code which is meant to run Lambda. I want to use it. I want to port it to Quarkus. Maybe I would use it then. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't look at it. I definitely would look at the funky stuff if it were enough for my purposes. So if I don't need the fancy cache control stuff and everything I got with HTTP, definitely the funky stuff looks good. And I think it would have been nice for my case. Actually, when I built this, the funky stuff was not as far as it is now. So that's why I went for the web stack and rest easy. I guess nowadays I would use funky. But, well, if I need to do the full thing and everything like, examining request headers and doing different languages and everything, then I would go for the web stack as I did. All right. So now the biggest question I get is, how does Java deal with the cold start scenario? And just for those of you who are not aware of that. So, I mean, as I mentioned, the serverless stuff, it's executed on an on-demand basis. And this means if nobody is using your application, and it might very well be the case for my blog search at any given point of time, no instance of this will be running, and no instance will be ready to process your request. This means now if you go to my website and you put in your search term, you submit this request, an instance of this search feature needs to be started right in that second. And this really means this needs to be done very fast because a user is sitting there and they're waiting for the response. And this is really where Quarkus helps me a lot because it's optimized for this kind of use case to start up very fast. I mean, it also optimized for memory usage, but that's not even so interesting for this use case. In this use case, I'm really after the fast startup. And now, if you are a bit familiar with Quarkus, you know it optimizes startup on the JVM, OpenJDK, but also GraalVM. And it does things like this entire notion of compile time boot. So it does many things a traditional stack would do at application startup. It does already do those things at build time of the image. So this means this is just faster to start. But really what I need for this kind of serverless cold start is I need to have those millisecond startup delays as we get them with GraalVM and native binaries. And it's so fast because well, there's this notion of compile time boot, but then also all this just-in-time compilation infrastructure is not needed there, right? So OpenJDK or a hotspot, a traditional JVM, it compiles your code into binary native code as you go, and this causes some sort of delay. We don't have this with GraalVM. And really, for my search, I look at, if I run it on my laptop, at the time until the first request of about 30 milliseconds. So that's definitely doable. On Lambda, it's a bit more because, well, they don't give you the full CPU share, but still, I have a first response usually in I don't know, 400 milliseconds or something like that. So that's definitely good.
Have you tested the difference between JVM startup versus Grail native startup?
I haven't, because I was quite sure that OpenJDK, and I mean, there's many things also in OpenJDK 14 and 15 which they did to improve startup, but I was quite sure it would not get me where I want to be here. So that's why I did not test it, and that's why I went for GraalVM right away.
Okay.
Now, the big challenge there is GraalVM, you cannot just take any kind of external dependency or library like Apache Lucene and run it as or within a native binary. I mean, you can try, but likely you're going to fail. And the thing is, or the reason is, there's quite a few of, constructs which are not supported as easily out of the box. Let's say reflection on arbitrary types or specific usages of method handles, interaction with JNI, all those kind of things. This needs some sort of configuration and, making or enabling a library to be used in a native binary. The good news is Quarkus comes with many, many extensions for a wide range of popular libraries or dependencies like Kafka clients, Vertex, Camel, Hibernate, Jaeger tracing, all those kind of things. So you get extensions for all these things out of the box. But then at some point, you might run into the situation I ran into. You're using a dependency and there's no Quarkus extension for it yet. And, well, then you are a bit on your own, I would say, or it's a more engineering-centric effort. So you need to try and understand why this isn't running as a native binary. And just to give you one example of the things I ran into with Lucene, so they are using method handles in a special way. And by the way, method handle support is growing in GraalVM, but right now there are some limitations. And now this meant that they have this attribute factory, which dynamically instantiates those metadata attributes. And they use method handles for that. And this didn't work on GraalVM. And what I did there is I created what's called a substitution. So you can essentially override classes of this dependency by your own implementation. So that's what I did. I provided a substitution for this attribute factory, which just uses regular constructor invocations for instantiating those attribute types. And now if I do create the native image, it's using those or this attribute factory instead of the original one, and the problem goes away. And now the thing is, Quarkus supports you in doing those kinds of things to a very large extent. So let's say you need to register classes for reflection, so you need to announce them. There's what's called a build item for that, which makes it easy for you as an extension author to do those kinds of things. And really there's build items for all sorts of things like adding, resources to your binary, enabling GNI, and all kinds of things. So definitely check out this ecosystem or this hierarchy of build items. And really what you should consider is if you have built an extension like this one for Lucene, you should, put it out to the public so other people can use it. I mean, either you get to contribute to the upstream project, so to make this more GraalVM friendly to begin with, or then the next option would be to contribute open source such an extension, and maybe even make it available on the Quarkus platform, which is essentially like a platform of different external extensions. So that's code starts, and that's how I could handle that for Lucene. But now the thing is, if you think about it, sometimes you even can avoid the user to run into the scenario to begin with, and this is what I'm showing here. So what I figured out as well, if you as a user put your cursor into this text input, very likely you're going to run a query shortly thereafter, right? And that's what I'm leveraging. So in the point in time where you put your cursor into this text control, I already sent a ping request to the backend. This fires up the Lambda environment if there's no instance running it. And then if you run the actual query like a second later, and you can see it here in my browser development tool, that this time is definitely enough, then this already will hit the warmed up environment. And now you could beat this if you were very quick to type and maybe you moved there with the cursor and everything, with your keyboard. But usually what I observe from the logs, people are not as fast. So definitely this little trick helps to avoid people running into the cold start scenario to begin with. All right, so what I just want to show you, I can go to my blog, so that's what I'm here. So just to see is run there.
We have some people who have tested it already,
okay,
interacted with it. I did myself.
Cool. All right,
you're not sharing your browser right now.
Sorry. Oh, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And because I'm just sharing a particular window. Let me try that. You see that? All right, I can do like phrase queries, let's say slide recorder, things like that. Multiple terms. So whatever you would expect from a search engine, I get this highlighting and so on. So what I would like to show you, how actually easy it is to get started with it. So I'm going to code.quarkus.io. And here I can bootstrap a new application, right? And I'm just for the sake of the example, let's say I'm using this Lambda HTTP.
Can you make that font bigger? Just
Absolutely. Sorry. There you go. So I'm just using this particular extension, and I'm using, let's say DN Live, DevNation Live as the artifact name. I'm going to generate that, download. Where did it put it? Oh yeah, I see. Okay, so let me go to my download folder. And I see now you don't see that too, right? That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because I just shared my browser window. Let me try one thing. Share screen. And click here. There you go. Now I'm sharing the screen, right? Excellent. So you should see my shell there. So I'm going to unzip the DN Live archive. I can take that one. Just create it. Live. And let me run it, or let me build it actually, and I'm going to skip the tests just for the sake of the example. And I want to show you it generates a few things already for me. And in particular, Well, now, of course, it will build the function deployable for me. So that's a zip file, which I then would later on deploy. So let's take a look at that one, target. And here I got this function zip file. So that's 13 meg, and that's my actual implementation. And in my case, it also would contain the search index, and it's the entire thing. But what's also interesting, it's also created those SAM files for me. And SAM, that is the serverless application model. And that's actually an API and a command line tool in AWS, which makes it a bit easier for me to deploy those Lambda things. So, and Quarkus generates those templates for me. So just to take a look at that target. So this essentially is infrastructure as a code, right? And if you have heard about Terraform or CloudFormation, it's a bit like that, but it's a bit more abstract. So it sits on top of CloudFormation and is specific to Lambda. And now here in this template, which got generated for me, it creates all the artifacts I need to deploy this on AWS. So like the API gateway instance gets deployed for me. The function instance gets deployed for me. It says like 512 meg RAM and so on. The function zip, that's what I want to deploy. And now actually, or literally, I'm 2 commands away from deploying this. I would now do SAM deploy or SAM package SAM deploy to put this to Lambda, and it would be running there. So that's really easy. I get it out of the box with Quarkus, and I'm really quick to get started there. All right.
But do you normally use SAM on the local desktop to interact and test before you send it up to Lambda?
Yeah, so you can use it for testing. So you can use it for testing Lambda in a local container environment. Usually, to be honest, I test just like via the web. I run Quarkus in dev mode, and then I call my local web endpoint. But you can definitely use a SAM for that. And also, actually, just to show you how the actual implementation looks like. So that's my search resource. So that's my little REST endpoint. And it's quite short. So overall, it's, I don't know, like not even 200 lines of code. And it's quite basic, right? I'm just taking the incoming query string. Then I do a bit of Lucene stuff to parse the string and everything. But so just to get an understanding, it's not that much code which is involved here. And what's also interesting is in this POM file, actually, I have this dependency. So that's the one I just added on the Bootstrap website. Put this into a build profile. And now if I build my project with the Lambda profile enabled, I would get the Lambda deployable. If I were to build it without the profile, I would get a regular, I could easily get a regular container image, which I could then run on Knative, for instance. So I'm very portable here. All right, so let me go back to my slides there. There again. Yeah, I think we got just a few more minutes. So for me now, as I mentioned, that's a side project for me, right? So I don't have an ops team which manage my blog 24/7. Instead, I really, this needs to be hands off. And so what was very important for me is cost control, right? So I don't want somebody to invoke this API a gazillion of times, and it would cost me, in the end of the day, it would cost me lots of money. So this was very important for me. Maybe if you were to use this in a professional environment and you have dedicated ops folks and they would have pager duty and everything, you might not be as keen on that aspect as I was. But for me, really, cost control was very important. So I did a few things like the API usage plan. So that essentially allows it to trim down how many times this API can be invoked in a week or in a month. So this is an important point. But then, unfortunately, there's what's called the coarse prefab requests. And essentially, I have this situation because I have my static content on GitHub pages, and I do this cross-origin request to the API gateway. And there you do those those coarse prefab requests. And the thing is, you cannot put them under an API usage plan, unfortunately, because you cannot customize the headers of those requests. And this means still somebody could, send me a gazillion of times of those pre-flight requests, and I would have to pay for them. And of course, I don't want to do this. If I sit on a plane for 12 hours or something, I cannot react to that, right? So that's a problem. And that's why I also put in place what I call the budget circuit breaker. And that's a very nice usage of Lambda. So what you can do is you can set up a budget in AWS, like $5 per month or something, and you can have alerts on those budgets. So let's say my $5 budget is spent to 50%. I can set up an alert, and this alert triggers this Lambda function for me. So I get another Lambda function. I guess it's a bit too small to read, but what it just does is it uses the AWS CLI to set the rate limit of my endpoint to 0. So I'm allowing for 0 requests per second, essentially shutting down the API. And now if any more requests come in, they would be rejected by the rate limiter and I wouldn't have to pay for them. And in my case, that's desirable because I would just rather shut this down in this kind of scenario instead of having to pay lots of money, right? Whereas maybe if you were to use this in your professional setting, you would decide, okay, I would like to serve all those requests because it's, it's fulfilling my business and so on. But for me, was very important. Another thing is, finally, I put everything behind Cloudflare just as an additional measure because there I have a hard limit of requests I can allow, and this also takes care of this cost issue. So that's another thing I did. All right. And I think that's pretty much what I had to share just in terms of lessons learned. So definitely I found the learning curve of Lambda is quite steep, but luckily, Quarkus helps you a lot with it. So it avoids all this login, as you have seen, so it's always portable. It generates the SAM templates for me, so this makes it really easy for me to get started with it. If I were to use the funky stuff, it would also give me some more helper scripts for deploying the stuff, for invoking it, and so on. So with Quarkus, I would say it's getting easy to get started with it. But otherwise, I felt it requires a bit of learning. Or maybe I'm just getting old and slow, I don't know, but I felt the learning curve is a bit steep. So that's the one thing. The other one is, as I mentioned, you should think about those kinds of denial of wallet attacks, right? So what happens if somebody invokes your API tons of times? So you should be prepared for that. And a few other things, really, like IAM, like the identity access management, that's also a tricky thing. Like you want to set up your roles and permissions in a way, it's like you want to have minimal permissions. So if I deploy this, let's say I were to use GitHub Actions to deploy this whenever I push my block, I would like to have a minimal privileged role to do that. And actually finding out about the permissions you actually need, it's quite tricky. So it involves a bit of research, and it's not so easy. So it's described on a blog post I wrote about. And finally, and I guess most important, you should decide whether serverless is the right thing for you or not. So I think in this particular use case, it definitely was a good, or it is a good solution for this problem. But as I mentioned, if you have a constant, predictable workload, maybe you're better off with something more traditional, right? So don't go for it just because it's the hot topic these days and you feel like everybody's doing it, so you should have to do it.
Everybody's doing it.
Everybody, exactly. That's the trap, right? And just lastly, a few more resources. So I have a blog post about it. So it's a bit meta, right? About a blog post on my blog about my search, which describes this in depth. So it goes definitely way more in depth than what I could cover today. Most of that really is open source on GitHub. So if you want to take a look at how it's implemented, also including this Lucene extension, this is all on GitHub for you to look at. Of course, go to Quarkus.io. They have all the quick starts, the guides, this code.quarkus.io for getting started. And lastly, I have this reference here to this budget circuit breaker. So I didn't come up with that myself. Harish, a guy who was super helpful on Stack Overflow, did this, and I'm very thankful to him. So definitely go and check out his blog about all those things. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for joining, and let's keep the discussion going if we've got some more questions.
Yeah, well, one question I have right off the bat is for the overall website, the live website that people went and tested during our session today. How much of that is done through Amazon Lambda versus some other technology with Amazon Lambda just being the search engine? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, the only thing which is running on Lambda is this search endpoint, right? So everything else, the actual HTTPS or the actual HTML, that's all coming from GitHub Pages. So that's all served via GitHub Pages. Only if you go here and this request which gets submitted there, this comes from AWS Lambda.
Okay. And how did you manage to make the GitHub Pages serve on a custom domain name? I didn't know you could do that.
Oh, wow. I mean, how much time do I have? It's actually quite tricky. You can do it. You also can do it with HTTPS. So all the dev domains, they require HTTPS. To be honest, it's a while since I have set it up. It's described on the GitHub Pages docs. It's a bit of a convoluted process, but it's definitely doable. Okay, and I'm very happy that I managed it.
But that's good to know. So basically, most of the blog is GitHub Pages. Therefore, you're just simply updating them as GitHub resources. There is no WordPress back there or anything funny like that. And then, of course, the search engine based on Lambda, which is very cool.
Exactly. And this comes back again to this notion of, just having a smaller text surface. I don't want to run my own WordPress thingy and everything. Right. I just push it to my GitHub branch. This gets built there via GitHub Action and pushed to the right branch, and then it gets published, and off you go.
That's very clever. So I bet people would be interested in the overall blog architecture, and then the search engine is separate from that, which you've documented.
Yeah, it's actually it's kind of described in this blog post. So here, I mean, that's essentially what I was talking about in much more depth. So this also is touching on it.
All right. Well, we'll definitely point people over to the blog. I did add the slide links to the various chats, so hopefully people have access to all the links that were in that slide deck. And I think we had some fun today. I know you have to get going to another session very soon. We covered most of the key questions. People were just asking some basic stuff along the way. But I really enjoyed the session because I learned a lot, because I think I've never tried AWS Lambda and Quarkus before. So I didn't realize they actually generate the SAM templates as an example.
Yeah, I think that's key, because really that makes it so easy. And the thing is, and maybe that's why it took me so long to get started, I really wanted to figure this out all by myself. And, I go to the official documentation, and then I was reading, wow, so Sam, that's another piece which I need to add, and it took me a long time to all understand it. But really, if you do it with the Quarkus stuff, they generate a lot of things for you. And I mean, you still should understand it, of course, but it's very easy actually to get started.
Well, the SAM template is essentially a CloudFormation template, I believe, at the end of the day. So that's how it actually gets pumped up to Amazon Lambda.
Right, so it gets converted into a CloudFormation template. So that has a different abstraction level, essentially. So out of one resource in the SAM template, multiple resources at the CloudFormation level, get generated, and then it gets deployed as a CloudFormation stack.
Yep. And I love your tip on the budget circuit breaker. That's another thing that hadn't occurred to me, but so that is awesome. Definitely a cool thing to be aware of. So you basically can limit your spend.
Absolutely right. And I mean, for me as a private person, it's just super important, right? So if I'm going on holidays for 3 weeks, I don't want to be bothered and, being nervous about somebody doing like a DDoS attack on my blog. I mean, not that I'm so important that anybody would do it, but, you just really want to exclude this possibility. And that's why I spent some time on just making sure this all is safe.
Well, I really love what you just said about going on holiday for 3 weeks. That's probably the more important tidbit right there.
Absolutely right.
You have time for a 3-week holiday. Okay, well, we can go ahead and get out of here. Gunnar, awesome stuff on this presentation. I loved it. It was really cool. It's nice to see a practical implementation of this technology that we're always talking about here on DevNation. I think we covered all the key questions on the Twitch channel, on the YouTube channel. So at this point, I believe we can get out of here. And by the way, Aware Penguin, I did notice that he was enjoying testing your blog in the search engine there himself. So people did go hit the blog, which is awesome. If you guys have further questions, feel free to email me. You guys have my email address. We gave you Gunnar's Twitter handle. You can follow him on Twitter and chase him down there. And Gunnar, where do we see you next? I think you said you got some QCon stuff coming up. You got some other live presentations?
All right. So on Saturday, actually, there will be Java Day Istanbul. So I will do a talk about Debezium, which is my main project. On Java Day Istanbul. Yeah, there will be something around QCon. I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to talk about it or not, but yeah, there will be something like that.
Okay.
And I think that's pretty much... Oh, yeah, there will be another Quarkus Insights session. So with the Quarkus guys, I'm also going to talk about Kafka and Kafka streams and how you can use that, very nicely.
Okay, well, fantastic. You guys will see a lot more of Gunnar coming up. Just pay attention to his Twitch stream, and his Twitter stream, and you should follow him there, because that way you can find out where he is. Thank you so much, Gunnar. Awesome stuff.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun. Thank you.
All right, and we're signing off. Thank you guys for being here. If you have other ideas for what you'd like to see on our channel, feel free to reach out to me. You have my email address in most cases, or you can follow me on Twitter, and we can definitely figure out how to put something cool like Gunnar here on the stage for you guys going forward. Do check out our next Tuesday event. We have DevNation Day. We're doing a whole day of live streams covering Quarkus and Kafka and Kubernetes and Python and quantum computing and JavaScript frameworks. We're doing all kinds of amazing stuff next Tuesday. Just be prepared for that. And that is our DevNation Day. Yeah, lots of fun stuff.
Cool.
All right, we're out of here. Have a good day. Bye now.